before we start our meeting, if you have a cell phone, please either turn it off or silence it. I will call the regular session of the Oregon City Commission to order for Wednesday, January 15th, 2020. Call roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Smith. Here. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Here. Please stand and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So in order to get this back on track here, I have to move something. So we're going to take the election of the commission president for 2020 right now. So are there nominations for commission president?
Yes, I would like to nominate Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith for Commission President.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further nominations? Nominations closed. Call roll, please. You don't get a chance to say no.
She should speak.
Do I vote?
Call roll.
You can vote, yeah. Do you have something to say, Rachel?
No.
Could be a 3-2, you know.
Commissioner Rachel Smith. Aye. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. Okay, so with that, we'll go back on track and we'll have the oath. No, Judge McNeese swears.
Oh, I know.
So we're going to, the oath of office for 2020 Commission President and the Honorable Lorraine McNeese, our municipal court judge, is presiding.
All right, if you would raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Rachel Lyle Smith,
I, Rachel Lyle Smith,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and of the State of Oregon,
and of the State of Oregon,
along with the Oregon City Municipal Code.
along with the Oregon City Municipal Code.
I will, to the best of my ability,
I will, to the best of my ability,
faithfully perform the duties
faithfully perform the duties
of Commission President of Oregon City
of Commission President of Oregon City
during my incumbency thereof.
during my incumbency thereof.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
We have a lull here. Yes, you do. Thank you.
You witnesses?
Who sits next to me? Are you coming over? No, I'm staying here.
Everybody can just stay where they are.
No, you can't.
Well, for
Yeah,
today.
you can stay where you're at. I'm gonna trade with Kabizman.
Oh, no.
No. Should I move over? It's just my tonight.
Yeah. If you want.
Don't need to tonight.
Yeah, let's. Okay, so next up we have the mayor appointments to city boards and commissions. We'll just go down the list. Reappointment of William Gifford to the Budget Committee for the remainder of the term ending December 31st, 2020. Appointment of Jeffrey Olivas to the Budget Committee for a 4-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2023. Reappointment of Chris Cook to the Urban Renewal Budget Committee for a 4-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2023. Reappointment of Scott Edwards. This is a city resident position, and appointment of David Goldberg, non-resident position, to the Library Board for a 4-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2023. Appointment of Chris Staggs to the Planning Commission for a 4-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2023. reappointment of Bob LaSalle, Neighborhood Association position, and Cedomir Jessic to the non-city resident position to the Transportation Advisory Committee for a 3-year term of January 1st, 2020, to December 31st, 2022. Reappointment of Grant Blythe to the Historic Review Board for a 3-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2022. Appointment of Sean Cross to the Urban Renewal Commission for a 4-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2023. Appointment of Sean Dackler, Andy Crump, and Brett Haverkamp to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee for a 3-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2022. Appointment of Chris Weaver and Devin Pilney to the Natural Resources Committee for a 3-year term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2022. We still have openings on the Historic Review Board for an architect. Natural Resources Committee has a vacancy with 2 years remaining. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, we're looking for a non-voting team position. Transportation Advisory Committee and the Urban Renewal Commission, we still have one seat to fill there. The Urban Renewal Commission application is closed on the 31st of January. With that, we'll do the oath of office for the Historic Review Board and oath of office for the Planning Commission, and Commission President O'Donnell will do those for me. Okay, this time.
So can we please have Chris Staggs
Is it,
come forward?
is it Commissioner Lyles?
The commission president?
Yeah, sure.
Start, sure.
Okay, no free. Sorry about that. I just,
Commission president.
I planned on.
I'm an alumnus.
You're something else.
Yeah, you're,
Putting me to work already?
I'm leaving now.
What am I doing?
Who's your replacement? Who's his replacement? I'm moving down. Yep.
I, Christopher Staggs,
I, Christopher
do
Staggs,
solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
and affirm that I support the Constitution of the United States
and affirm that I support the Constitution of the United States
and laws of the state of Oregon,
and laws of the state of Oregon,
along with the Oregon City Municipal Charter and Code.
along with the Oregon City Municipal Charter and Code.
I will respect and support
I will respect and support
the Planning Commission bylaws,
the Planning Commission bylaws,
policies, operations, and decisions.
policies, operations, and decisions.
I recognize that a commission member
I recognize that a commission member
has no legal authority as an individual
has no legal authority as an individual,
and that decisions can be made only by a majority vote
and that decisions can be made only by a majority vote
at a public planning commission meeting.
at a public planning commission meeting.
I will faithfully and honorably perform
I will faithfully and honorably perform
the duties of the office for which I am about to assume.
the duties for the office I'm about to assume.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Am I signing something? Okay.
Thank you.
Are we doing HRB too?
We're going to ask, HRB will be done at the next meeting. He was unable to make it to this meeting.
Okay.
I'd like to ask, Chris Staggs has some family here. If they would like to come forward, we can get a picture. Take the nice one, yes. I'll keep the one copy. Yeah, the white copy is mine, and you can take the folder. Thank you. And then if you want to get a picture here with your family.
Denise, that's got my agenda. Sorry.
That's okay.
After a while, all the papers start looking the same anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Not quite.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, and we're going to do the commission appointments for 2020 at the next meeting as well.
Okay.
Fine.
So we're up to citizen comment. Do we have anybody under citizen comment?
We do not.
All right. The last chance anybody wants to say anything that's not on the agenda tonight, then we'll move on. Here, everybody okay with the agenda?
Maybe.
Other than the consent agenda, I think we need to pull one item.
When we get there, we'll do that.
Okay.
So, public hearings, this is PC 20-004, Forest Edge Apartment Stabilization, Geologic Hazard Review, Natural Resource Overlay District, and Site Plan and Design Review. Ms. Turway.
All right, thank you very much. This series of applications was submitted to address the groundwater as well as some stormwater improvements at the lower campus of Forest Edge Apartments. In addition, they're doing an emergency access. Mr. Kabizman has some legal reading for you as well.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Way. And this is basically how the public hearing proceed is set out at over on the wall there in the public hearing procedures. And it will be based on the staff report that was issued a week ago and can be found at the back of the room, which lists the applicable substantive criteria. All testimony, evidence, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward those criteria or to those criteria that you believe apply to the application. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the City Commission and the other parties an opportunity to respond to the issue would preclude an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue, and failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the Commission to respond to the issue will preclude an action for damages in circuit court.
Okay.
Oh, and before, this is also the time for any bias, ex parte, or conflict of interest declarations. Any declarations that the commissioners want to make?
I have none.
Yeah, you do. You visited the site.
I visited the site. Well, let's put it this way. I tried to visit the site, but there's a fence that restricts entry to the site, so I was unable to actually visit the site.
I did the same thing as well. That anybody have any?
I just need to declare that I'm very familiar with the site, and I have been on site before, not since the fence went up, but prior to that.
And I was on the site during the evacuation.
Right.
Well, to be clear, I've never been on the site.
Okay.
Okay. Any challenges to any participation by any members of the commission? Seeing none?
All right.
Mr. Wade, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Again, this application is to address water on site as well as an emergency access. This is not an application to reoccupy the structures on site. Christina Robertson-Gardner, our senior planner, will start the presentation.
Thank you, Laura. Mayor, City Commissioners. Just a quick overview. This application is for a review for the dewatering wells, which were installed to abate the hazard in the site, as well as a new stormwater system and the new emergency access road paved in the same location as the previous access road. This application was called up by the City Commission. The record is open and anybody may testify this evening. The review is limited to the applicable criteria found in the staff report, and I have all the criteria on the last slide we can go through. And as Ms. Turway mentioned, any request for certificate of occupancy for the site is processed with the building official, and they review that based on the Oregon City Building Code and the 2019 Oregon Structurally Specialty Code. As part of that review, they will have concurrence with development services that they believe that the site, the remediation measures have occurred, and they believe that development services believe the site is safe to occupy. So that is a separate process that the applicant can move forward to whenever they wish. A quick timeline of events on the site. This is not comprehensive, but does provide some highlights. In 1997, the Mule Creek Overlook Apartments were built. There was a reactivation of the Ancient Slide in the winter of 2005 and 2006. In 2015, the apartments in the lower campus were evacuated, and the lower buildings were determined a dangerous building, and they've been vacated ever since. 2016, the property was purchased by RJL Holdings. The dewatering wells were added in 2017 as an emergency action, and they have been working with the Oregon City Development Services and Planning Department in 2018 and 2019 on their application. So this is really 3 reviews combined into one staff report. A site plan and design review to review the access road connection once the access road was removed. We saw the repaving was considered new construction, so that was triggered site plan and design review. The geologic hazards reviewed the dewatering wells, the underground or stormwater detention system, and the access road. And the natural resource overlay district is triggered whenever new impervious surface is either added or there is disturbance area as part of installation. And so the items that were triggered by the Natural Resource Overlay District was the new access road, some of the dewatering wells. Some of the dewatering wells were added into the existing pavement, which didn't trigger the Natural Resource Overlay, and a couple of them were just outside of the pavement, which did, even though they were only about 30 square feet each, they did trigger, as well as the disturbance area for the new stormwater system. I have a couple slides with site orientation. The lower campus is to the north of the whole site. Zoom in, kind of the 3 areas that we're talking about this evening. We have the surface road reconnection area. So this aerial photo shows that surface road in its current state that being taken out. The Natural Resource Overlay District mitigation is generally in the downslope area at the bottom part of the north campus. And the new stormwater vault is mainly under the existing pavement, but there's some construction area just outside, as well as the new stormwater pipe construction.
So the garages on the back side are gone now?
Correct, they're gone. Actually, about where the garages are is about where the mitigation replanting area is, give or take.
Okay.
This shows the general location of the dewatering wells. We have a photo to the right of kind of existing condition. I know the applicant can talk a little bit about, this is kind of the interim condition, what the final condition of the dewatering wells will look like. The Natural Resource Overlay District encompasses Newell Creek and tributaries of Newell Creek, specifically what you'll see in the area related to the stormwater system is a tributary of Newell Creek. And that is right here. So a lot of this lower area is in the Natural Resource Overlay District. The stormwater system, you'll see the new stormwater vault as well as the new stormwater line. To your left, the Natural Resource Overlay District mitigation replanting area is about where those garages were located. Did I do that? Sorry. And the surface road connection is shown there. So you'll see the areas in pink are where the Natural Resource Overlay District is reviewed, and the areas in yellow means they're outside the district. The existing stormwater pond was kind of farther down the hill, and it is currently not being used. As part of this proposal was a recommendation of how to take the stormwater and release it in an area that is more appropriate for the geologic makeup of the site. And I know our development services can provide a little more information, but I wanted to show a site plan kind of showing the different locations.
So what exactly is it discharging into? Is it going into Newell Creek?
It's going into a tributary of Newell Creek. So if you see where the green arrow is,
right, that
is the tributary that will then head into Newell Creek.
So what's that called?
It's an unnamed tributary.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And what kind of treatment of the stormwater has to happen prior to going into the tributary?
Sure, and I'll leave that to the slide where Josh Wheeler, our assistant city engineer, will speak to that. So these are more orientation slides. So for the natural resource review, mitigation is a clear and objective process through the Natural Resource Overlay District. It's a 2-to-1 replacement in size with a specific formula of replanting. That's a condition of approval for the applicant. 2 pieces of our Natural Resource Overlay Code were kind of conflicting with the geologic recommendations about removing water from the hillside. This is where a lot of our Natural Resource Overlay District comments kind of envision a flatter area, so we want more water, but when you have it on a steep slope, 2 specific requirements really from the geologic review was to relocate the stormwater outfall closer to the tributary creek to make sure we weren't releasing stormwater halfway on the hillside. and we want to take the water out rather than discharging it in, and not installing interim drip irrigation along that hillside, which was generally a requirement of the mitigation plan, though there is a requirement that their watering plan still has to show 80% survival. So if they're not doing drip irrigation, they need to show their watering plan. I mean, if it's hand watering or whatever they choose to do, we'll work with them to figure out if what they're proposing will guarantee an 80% survival. At this time, I'm going to hand this over to Josh Wheeler, our Assistant City Engineer, and Tim Pfeiffer, our Consulting Technical Consultant, will provide an overview of the staff's analysis of the Geo Overlay District. I'll pass it over to Josh.
Thank you, Christina. And I have Tim Pfeiffer from Foundation Engineering here tonight, who is our geotechnical consultant that does all of our geotechnical reviews on behalf of the city. So we're going to go back and forth on some of these slides. So why don't you go ahead and summarize the first one of how this application meets the code.
Hey, I'm Tim Pfeiffer with Foundation Engineering. We do development review for the city and related to geologic hazards. And we've reviewed this project for the technical aspects of the dewatering plan. So what they've done is they've installed dewatering wells to lower the groundwater and stabilize the site. And they've monitored that over a winter and seen that the water level is below summer level with the dewatering. And the previous movement has always been during rather extreme precipitation events with high groundwater. So then Geodesign's engineering of the project is a common method of stabilizing landslides, and they've provided the redundancy in the system and the margin that we would expect, and met the other criteria for the geologic hazards.
And the code we follow is Chapter 1744 of the City Code, which in general says that disturbance has to be minimized, that inspection is required during that construction, and that we also require indemnity agreements to ensure that it's ultimately their issue if something happens. Tim, do you feel that what the application we received to date meets the 1744 code?
Yeah, the application, in substantial conformance with 1744 meets that requirement. It's, certainly a unique situation in that we're, mitigating an existing problem with a history. I think maybe one point to make is that, by stabilizing this block of the landslide, they've reduced the risk for the surrounding area in addition to, stabilizing this block that has the history.
I have a question for the gentleman.
Yes.
Over what period of time did you monitor that? And what were the average rainfalls? Were they representative of those events that we have experienced in the past? I understand that the method of measurement is essentially a water barometer, piezometer.
Yeah.
And you monitored that over a specific period of time. Did we have significant rainfall events like we did in 1996 or subsequent to that?
No, they didn't have an event of that magnitude.
Okay.
What they had was, they can address that probably better than I can, but they didn't.
I just want to understand your monitoring period. Thank you.
Okay. And so, just as a reminder, this is what the geologic hazards area look like. You've got, on the left side of the screen, you've got the landslide scarp, where everything wants to move. In the middle, you've got the actual landslide hazard, the ancient landslide, as it's called, that moves over time. And then the map on the right side just shows the general geologic hazard area with the buffer in the lighter colors. So the whole thing is encompassed in a geologic hazard area. This is a picture of their, the yellow highlighted are their dewatering wells, and the green highlighted are some monitoring wells that are out there. This is on their existing topography plan for their civil plans. So you can see where they're located and they're all around. Any specific questions about those you can ask the applicant on. So we really have a confidence in their design. Geodesign, the geotechnical engineer, they have stamped the report and its memorandum, so they're putting their official seal behind that, which gives us confidence. They're also a firm that works in the area, that is known in the area. Public Works definitely would not be recommending approval if we don't feel like it met the standards. We do feel it does meet the 1744 code standards. And compared to other geotechnical submittals that we get, the design is really above and beyond due to the dewatering well system, which was definitely appropriate in this situation, whereas other sites wouldn't require something this substantial because there was not a history and there was not any evidence of certain hydrology issues where there is here. The calculations, as Tim said, do show that the wet weather water levels are reduced to below pre-level summer water level positions. Yes, that's based on the rainfall we had over the last year and a half, 2 years, somewhere in there. But you should be able to see a similar type of water change even in higher events too, but that's something that their geotech should be able to answer. And as Tim said, the infiltration has been reduced, and that means we've lowered the probability of a future slide. If this were to go forward, as is today, what they're doing already lowers the probability of a future slide. And it doesn't make it completely dry like a desert, so it still retains the ability to keep the adjacent land with vegetation so that erosion doesn't occur when we do have a rainfall. And just as a reminder, there's unique conditions that are in the staff report. We're requiring a dewatering system operation and maintenance plan and covenant. So it's not only an operation and maintenance plan that tells them what to do and how to do it, it's a covenant that says whether it's you or a future owner, you must do this forever. It'll be recorded on the property, and anyone present and future will be required to follow that. They will have proper abandonment of the existing utilities, proper abandonment of the existing stormwater management area that you heard about a minute ago. That is no longer functioning. It's basically covered up, and so they're going to put a new system in. That system will have a mechanical treatment, which is one of the options that we have in our stormwater ordinance, specifically for situations like this, and it will meet all of our water quality standards that we have in our stormwater ordinance. And then the piping that they'll use will be tight line piping, which conveys the stormwater instead of letting it disperse into the ground. And then erosion will be controlled by a riprap dissipation, where it makes sure that the water doesn't come in forcefully and erode everything, but it'll be broken up by larger rocks. And then during the December 4th presentation that was made, there were some questions, and so we just wanted to present a couple of those. There was questions about the indemnity agreement, which they've provided to us since that time. It's ready to record if the project were to go forward. And that requires all property owners, whether present or future, to be responsible for the site. The dewatering system covenant also requires the property owner for present and future to be responsible. Public Works will require an annual report so that we see what's going on an annual basis, and if anything's changing, then we have the ability to try and see something better happen. And as Tim said, the upper campus will be stabilized because of the new control of the lower campus. They'll be drying that out and keep it from moving, and that will act basically as a blockade to keep the upper campus from having any trouble in the future, at least on a probability scale. So that's all of our presentation. We'll be around for questions after if you have them.
Okay.
Thanks, Josh. One thing I wanted to add.
Okay. Good.
In the monitoring plan, an extra piece of condition approval that we thought was warranted was a yearly resident education requirement. So not only new owners, but any resident that lives on the site is educated about the dewatering wells and the monitoring plan. And that is that's put into the condition of approval.
Okay. So I will now open the public hearing.
Real quick, I have one more slide, sorry. Apologies. Very close. Once again, this is a review of the applicable criteria. I have that available if you want to ask questions about the specific chapters. When we look at type 2 applications, we look if the applicant can meet the standard, and if not, can we create a specific condition of approval that gets them there? So that's the same request we're asking the City Commission in your discussions. If we recommend, if you do not believe the applicant can meet a requirement, can additional condition approval be added that can get them there? And finally, you have the kind of options this evening to approve the application, approve with conditions, which is staff's recommendation, or deny. And before the hearing is open, I know Mr. Geisman has a comment about an applicant's comment that was submitted today about a procedural question.
Actually, thank you, Christina. Mayor, Commissioners, there was a letter submitted by the attorney for the applicant earlier this week raising a procedural issue about the city's process in doing this. As you know, or as it's laid out in the staff report, this is a type 2 decision. Typically, it's a staff decision with the City Commission having the ultimate decision-making authority should it get appealed. No appeal was filed, and so instead, the commission decided to call it up on its own in a meeting in December, and the applicant has taken issue with that, saying that this is a the commission doesn't have authority. I think, as we discussed in December, that the commission does have inherent authority as the residual body for all city powers. It would otherwise have authority to hear the appeal. The applicant's attorney is correct that our city code does not specifically provide for that. There are some LUBA cases that talk about inherent authority, but none of them give a definitive answer on whether this is a case or not. I will tell you there's a 1988 case from a while ago where a county board of commissioners did something very similar, and LUBA affirmed the county in that case when the issue was brought up. More recently, in 2016, the city of Portland was reviewing a zoning verification decision, and the city commission had brought that up, and there are a variety of procedural challenges to it. And again, LUBA didn't find error in that action. They did eventually remand the decision to the city. But so, what I can tell you is that there is no definitive LUBA Court of Appeals authority saying you have that ability. But I do think the inherent authority allows you to bring that forward.
Okay. Now, I will open the public hearing. Yeah. And the applicant has 15 minutes.
Brian, why don't you work your chair right there?
You've got a chair. Brian.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Jameson. Oh, there you go. Thank you very much. Let me just bring this up right here. And
yes.
It's good to be with you again. It was about a month ago. I'm Jameson Luther from RJL Holdings. We're the applicant. And I wanted to let you know that this application that you have in front of you has been 3 years in the making. I don't know if we can get that up here.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
Or did you already move forward a couple slides? Okay, sorry.
No.
Let me just back it up a minute. Okay.
There we go. Okay, so on my left here, we've got Brian Lee from Pace Engineers. They've been doing our civil work. And Eric Staley from Geodesign. They're our geotechnical engineer. As I said, this has been about 3 years in the making. And I'm proud of the work we've done by these professionals. And I'm looking forward to showing you guys how we have solved this long-standing issue for the city. So I just wanted to give you a quick site overview. This is our community. The upper campus is 68 fully functioning apartment units. We've done a lot of repairs since we've owned this property. We purchased it in December 2016. New roofs, we're doing some unit upgrades. We've taken care of a lot of deferred maintenance. First and foremost, we put a nice big fence over there to protect the lower campus, which wasn't there before. Seems like it's working. Which is good. And we have 3 full-time staff that take care of the property for us. Some of them are here tonight. So the next slide is just a site overview. You can see the upper campus on the left there. You see the lower campus on the right, which is 42 vacant units. Above that is Berry Hill, you'll see their retaining wall that they completed, I think, 2 years ago. Some of this you just heard, I'll restate. 2006, ancient landslide block reactivated. This landslide is characterized by slow-moving soils in the wet season and no movement observed in the dry seasons, okay? And that's a really key point. And there's been many geotechnical engineers that have observed the site and made the same observations. This site was habitable for 10 years, these 42 units we're talking about, until December 15. We had additional sliding on Berry Hill, and the sliding had moved enough that at that access road connecting the upper campus and the lower campus, it separated enough that it disconnected the sewer water utilities. They didn't have services down there. We got to get the residents out. We were not here during that time. We just heard about it and read about it. So December 2016, a year later, RJO Holdings purchased the property. And I'd like to point out the major difference is that from when we took over the property is we actually spent the money to study the problem. Previous geotechs had said you need to spend a considerable amount of money to put the instrumentation in the ground and study to know what's going on, model the slope. No previous owner did that. We did. So I just want to briefly explain to you some of the instrumentation in the ground. There's two major instruments, inclinometers, which are those yellow triangles, and piezometers. Inclinometers measure ground movement down to about the 100th of an inch. So they're very accurate, precise at measuring ground movement. Piezometers measure the groundwater level and how high it rises, so we can understand that. Okay, so what was the problem after all of our study and money putting into it? The problem is, after heavy or prolonged rain events, the groundwater level rises. When the water levels get too high, the ground starts to slowly move. Why? Kind of common sense. The more water in the ground, the heavier the soil becomes. When the soil gets too heavy, it increases the downward force and begins to move. So what's the solution? It's dewatering. It's a commonly used method for stabilizing a landslide that's caused by groundwater levels that are too high. So here's a site of our 14 dewatering wells. We installed these 14 dewatering wells we started in December 2017. As soon as we figured out that's what we need to be doing, we didn't want to go through a rainy season without it. We put in these 14 wells, and they were activated, fully activated and operational on March 2018. Okay, so that's almost 2 years ago that they've been fully activated and working. So this next slide, we're going to take a little bit of time with. This graph right here is going to show you, in the red, these were the pre-dewatering groundwater levels. Okay? We measured it for about a year's time. The average level of that groundwater pre-dewatering was 9.6 feet. Let's take over the year. So now you see in the blue, our dewatered, post-dewatering groundwater level average is 28.6 feet over a year's time, or almost a year's. A couple were December 19. So the difference in that is 19 feet. Now, just to give you a sense of scale, this dewatered site on the lower campus is about 3.5 acres. So 19 feet of groundwater weighs roughly 60 million pounds. Okay, now take that into kind of account. That's 60 million pounds roughly that of driving force that is no longer on that slope. So this is from a memo from Geodesign just this year. A dewatering system consisting of 14 dewatering wells vertical wells was installed at the lower campus in the spring of 2018. The system has dropped groundwater levels below those measured during pre-dewatering summer months. Inclinometer data indicate the dewatering system has had the desired effect in arresting landslide displacement. Additionally, the degree of dewatering observed at the site provides some freeboard in groundwater levels for the site to respond to heavy precipitation events. I had to Google freeboard, don't worry about it, you're probably like me. It means that there's headroom. We have ability to handle even heavier rainfall events. Take that 19 feet, right, from where we were at. So a really important point to make is that for 2 years, almost 2 years, the system's been on, and we have ground proofed that from the inclinometers that we have stopped this landslide.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So the data on this shows this is a deep-seated landslide versus a shallow landslide. So if you're talking about groundwater depths and how much you're trying to reduce the amount of groundwater, what's the average depth reduction of groundwater for shallow versus deep? I mean, yes, it sounds like a lot, but you're talking about a deep-seated landslide, which is different than a shallow landslide. So do you have any general stats of what the difference would be?
You want to talk about the difference, kind of get at what she's asking?
Maybe just
how do we know that that's enough? I might say, okay, 19 feet sounds like enough for a shallow landslide, but if it were a deep-seated landslide, which this one is, how do we know that that's enough?
Well, in the first place, empirically, because it's not moving based on the inclinometer data that we've been monitoring for almost a couple of years now. In addition, because the groundwater levels are lower than the summertime levels, which numerous people have said, the slide doesn't move in the dry season, and we've achieved a water level below the dry season. So as far as how you could otherwise, say theoretically, decide if that was an adequate amount of dewatering, we made a slope stability model back in our first report in July 2018 to help understand how much dewatering we needed to achieve to stabilize the slide. And that actually is what drove the dewatering system to a degree when we were doing the initial stages of that design. And we figured it was about 20 feet is about the dewatering that we were looking for in order to definitely reach a factor of safety, which is, because it's theoretical, you can't just go for exactly stable, you want to go beyond that, and that's what we did.
Okay.
John, I think the difference of the landslide being shallow, deep-seated, I think what supersedes it is what Eric said, is that the instrumentation in the ground that's used to measure land movement has said it's been stopped through the rainy seasons, right? Did that answer your question?
It does, but your instruments have only been in the ground for a couple of years, so.
That's true. That's true.
And the placement of the instruments, is that critical in the value of the data that they give? Should they be on a slope, or it looks like some of them are on roadways, essentially?
What we were shooting for was an uphill and a downhill array, which is why they are the two oriented the way they are, because they capture the same cross-section, as it were, through the slide. Whether they're on the road or not really doesn't matter. It's a pipe vertically oriented in the ground, and all that happens at the surface is our access to it. But really it's capturing the shear, and it's installed below the slide plane, so there's a portion of that pipe that doesn't move. And then as we take measurements up through the pipe, we track how much a probe is displaced over time, and that's how we can tell if something has shifted or not.
I'm familiar with the device.
Okay. I'm glad.
Okay, civil engineering degree, so we can talk.
Okay, awesome.
Good.
Well,
so
talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Let me explain a little bit about this particular dewatering system, right? Our system is, hold on, let me go back. So this is 14 vertical wells, and they're powered wells. They have 1/2 horsepower submersible pumps. They're 8-inch wells with a 4-inch submersible 1/2 horsepower pump. It's similar to a drinking well. Pumps it right up to the top, and then it gravity feeds out, and they all connect, and then gravity feed down to the discharge point. There is an alarm and telemetry system if the water in the wells rises past our target levels that Geodesign has set. The alarm automatically triggers and alerts Geodesign and our dewatering contractor. It's important to note that if any one of these wells goes down, even if all of them were to go down, it's not like all of a sudden we're at catastrophic risk level, right? This site tolerated these slow-moving soils, this cycle in the wet season, over 10 years before it eventually disconnected these things. The other thing is we're required to install a backup generator as part of our conditions. This is a very simple system to maintain. As I said, similar to drinking wells, PVC well casings, they have a life expectancy of 50 years. This is a 7 horsepower total system. Just to give you a sense of what that is, that's less than your home AC conditioner. It's low cost to maintain and repair. Each well was about $10,000 if we had to replace one, or if we had to add one, which I'll add in a second. Each pump is $800. It's similar to us replacing a water heater. These are off-the-shelf parts that are readily available. I want to make note of this last point. It's a modular system. And this is to your point, Commissioner Smith. We have headroom, but let's say something does start to develop, right? We have the ability to add more well points if the groundwater levels are rising up and geodesign feels they're too high. You're also going to get an annual report, which we'll talk about later, of the performance of the system. But we can add more well points rather easily.
So the depth of the wells is somewhere in the 19-foot range, which is a level, probably a little bit deeper than that, but you're maintaining that 19-foot extra buffer.
Depth of the wells.
Sure. And the depth of the shear zones is 45 to 80 feet, and you say that the proof is, from the measurements you've taken, the effectiveness proof.
The depth of the slide plane?
Well, the depth of the shear zones is 45 to 80 feet. You say that's not a concern in this, that your attenuation by virtue of water removal makes that statement.
Right. So the wells that we have installed basically go down to the shear plane.
They do?
Yes, okay. They do. They do. So the amount of dewatering we're getting, in the shallow portion of the soil, we have a lot of effect and it draws it down quickly. But as you start to get with depth, you get more and more of that borehole wall that can provide water. And so we are drawing that down steadily to at least 20 feet lower. But wells are installed 40 to 60, maybe even 70 feet. And we're trying to make sure that they're not below the shear plane, or more importantly, that the pump isn't below the shear plane, because if there ever was something that happened to it, It would compromise the parts, right?
So, real quickly, how do dewatering systems handle big rain events like, we've had 700-year events, the Vernonia floods of 1996 were really popular. Everybody knows, we had Pineapple Express, we had lots of snowmelt, we had these big events. I'm trying to figure out, how does dewatering handle an event versus just the typical rainy season?
So the wells operate basically on a float system. When your water level gets over a certain point, it'll trip. If we had a lot more water come in, they'd be on a lot more effectively. Now, could we reach a point where the wells might not be able to keep up with it? It's possible. And we recognize that, and that's what Jameson is trying to speak to here, is that this is a modular system. We have room to put in additional well points into that system to try and draw more water out of the volume of the soil.
So what capacity of rain event have you planned for than for this amount of well capacity?
Well, truth be told, it's very difficult to model the rainfall that first infiltrates into the soil and then migrates through the soil to the wells. We did aquifer testing of the in-situ soil to see what kind of draw we could get, and that defined the spacing of the wells that we have right now. How much the surface rainwater ends up becoming groundwater, that's a very difficult nut to crack. I don't know that we could do that theoretically.
Well, the only way you could do that is if your pumps kick on when the float activates them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then below that, there's a column of water that you don't know if it's up to just below your pump or it's bone dry all the way to the bottom.
Right.
You're not monitoring that.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, we are.
Okay, so you don't have that data. We don't know what that saturation rate would be that would overcome the pumps, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
One comment you mentioned, surface water runoff. We need to get this plan approved so we can actually fix a lot of the damaged surface water runoff collection systems in the stormwater system down there that is part of our application, and will have positive beneficial effects being able to repair that. One question that's come up is that we've heard that this is a unique system. I've heard of a system like this. Our system is not unique, and it is a long-term solution. This is worth reading. It's from Geodesign's memo as well from earlier this year. Many landslides are mitigated using powered active systems like the one at Forest Edge. Geodesign has experience using these systems, including stabilization of a 50-acre landslide using a 16-well dewatering system on another site. The wells require monitoring and maintenance to ensure they're properly functioning, and they have stabled this massive landslide for close to 20 years. Owner obligations. So I hope we've said enough about how we've ground-proofed that the landslide is stopped, this site is safe, but how do we keep it safe, right? First off, I should mention, as an owner of the property, we are incentivized to keep our units habitable, livable, and a good community. Otherwise, we lose tenants. If a water heater goes out, someone can't live there. So we get out there and replace it. No one has to come out and tell us to replace the water heater. I'm gonna go do it as fast as I can. But, as I tell my kids, talk is cheap, right? Actions speak louder than words. So, there's 2 recorded documents that we will be willing to record on the property that run with the land, and they will bind us and any future owners into perpetuity to the following. And this is a rehash of kind of what staff had said. Maintain and operate a dewatering system per the operating and maintenance program. Monitor groundwater levels and inclinometers regularly. Provide an annual report to the city on the dewatering system results. We will provide tenants with an annual education on the presence and purpose of a dewatering system. We grant the city the right to enter the property and maintain the system if the owner doesn't, that's a typo in there, does not maintain and repair the system. It's not a double negative. It's not a fingers crossed or anything. And we will reimburse the city for those costs. And then the second document, which is pretty powerful, it's a release and indemnity of Oregon City for all claims and expenses related to land movement at our site. So closing. We've spent, as I said, 3 years getting to this point. We've hired some excellent professionals who have done some excellent work. And we have shown, now proven for almost 2 years, that we have stabilized this landslide. The city professional staff we've been working with for over a year, they have done a great job holding us accountable to the code. We have pre-responded to many of their conditions, and they have deemed it approved with conditions. I just want to list some 4 major benefits to the city to approve this application. First, this will provide a resolution to a long-standing issue for the city. I would love nothing more than to put a positive end to what I've heard and what I know was a serious event in 2015 in this site, and even when it was developed. So I'd like to put a positive bookend on that. These are 42 units of desperately needed affordable housing. It's the same down in Southern California, same here. Affordable housing is needed. And the way you fix that, a very quick and good way, is more supply. Our 2 bedrooms rent for $1,350 versus over $2,100 for new developments in the surrounding areas. Vacant buildings, these things have to be addressed. Okay, right now they're a risk. We have constant security and maintenance to go down there and make sure they're protected. We would very much like to get these addressed. And then the last major one is the city has a major opportunity with us standing here before you of finally have a willing and responsible owner who's willing to record these future protections for the city and for the site into perpetuity. That'll bind us and all future owners as long as this site is here. So that's an opportunity you have with us, right? Without approving this application, who knows where the road goes, right? With us or someone else. So I really hope you can appreciate the work that we've done here. That ends our presentation, and I would ask you guys to approve it so we can get started completing the repairs in April. And like I said, bring a positive resolution to this site.
Thank you.
I do have a question for the gentleman.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So for RJL Holdings or for any subsequent owner, if that ownership were to enter into bankruptcy, what financial vehicle is provided to guarantee the ongoing maintenance of this? Is there an insurance policy of some kind, or what? Or there's nothing?
There is not an insurance policy for that. If the property were to, the ownership entity were to go bankrupt, no, there is a possibility of a maintenance bond, which we, a maintenance bond for that.
Ongoing in that event?
Yeah, it's ongoing. It wouldn't be into perpetuity. That wouldn't be something we'd be willing to sign on to, but to get comfortable for maybe, like a 5-year period that a maintenance bond will be provided in the event that there's an issue, the city has to come in and the owner, whoever it is nowhere to be found and there's no money to pay for it, right?
Have you explored that? Is that a reality or that's a theoretical?
No, it is a reality. We've had calls. I had a call with a surety bonds broker, and we discussed that, and it's definitely something that's doable. It's feasible for us that we'd be willing to do, is put up a 5-year, $100,000 bond, a maintenance bond, and it would be, if the city has to come in, then they could make a claim to the surety, hey, these guys weren't maintaining the system, and then there would be that money there to pay for it.
Okay, thank you. It's good information.
Okay, thank you, and you'll get a chance to provide any comments that are coming now. So we're going to take the next step is the public testimony. I have a whole bunch. So we'll start with Dirk Schlagenhofer and Frank Rose.
Mayor, 3 minutes. What would you like to set the time? Usually.
Yeah, I think 3 minutes is fine. We've only got eight people. Commissioner, how are you?
Good.
Yeah. They call you?
You go.
Yeah.
Sit down, right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Dirk Schlagenhofer, Oregon City. I had a lot of good stuff written down here, but then I was reviewing it before I came and realized I made some miscalculations. So some of the stuff is not quite as good as I was hoping. I think one thing okay, my disclaimer, hold on. I'm not an analyst. I'm not a geotechnical engineer or a hydrologist. So I don't have I don't have the expertise to say if this is right or wrong. This is just something I'm observing. It's a stormwater removal system, but they are removing groundwater, and then they're disposing it as stormwater. But groundwater is a natural resource, and the miscalculation I made was in the number of gallons that they're pulling out. I thought it was much more, but what I'm thinking is it still adds up. 36 gallons per minute in March, but I don't know if that is continuous or if that is, it's on a float, pulls it down, shuts back off. So it'd be nice to know if that means it's going to be a continuous 36 gallons per minute, all day, every day, all month, or if it's for an hour and then it shuts off for the rest of the day. But 36 gallons per minute flow, and then in June it was 15 gallons per minute flow when it's not really raining, so that tells me it could be an aquifer where it's just groundwater always there. That is 20 to 50,000 gallons a day, which seems like a complete waste of groundwater. And what kind of negative effect are we having from removing that much groundwater from the ground? I know dewatering is a good way to stabilize the ground, but are there any negative side effects to that? Do we know that? I know that removing a lot of groundwater can cause settling. I have read that. You can cause some buildings movement just from removing too much water. So those were a couple of concerns I had.
All right, thank you. Frank?
Hi, my name is Frank Rose. I'm the maintenance manager at Forest Edge. I just wanted to come here and talk on behalf of all all the good stuff that's going on at Forest Edge and maintaining the apartments that are open right now. And just to let you guys know, whenever there is a problem, there is, Jameson's always available if I have any questions. I talk to him or Louise, the general manager, and we get the problem resolved as soon as possible, and anything that comes up. And with the security and making sure the lower property is closed up and everything is safe down there, we go down usually twice a week, and just to make sure it's all still boarded up and everything, that nothing's going wrong. Yeah, and that's really all I have. So,
Have you had any issues with folks breaking into those units?
Yes, teenagers, if there's abandoned property, there are always kids that will want to go into them. I think it's just curiosity kids. But as soon as we see it, we board it back up and make sure there's nobody inside before we board it up, and try to keep it as clean as possible.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
I don't know if it's possible, but is it possible that removing that much water out of an aquifer would affect downstream people with wells? Maybe they would lose well capacity. Is that something to look into?
Well, to be honest, I can't think of anything downhill from there where there would be a well.
Down by Abernathy, by the bridge, there's a couple houses down in there. I don't know if they're still on well or not.
No, everything in the city is on city water.
Okay.
I don't think we have any well water as far as individual homes on wells still in the city limits. Maybe it's possible.
There might be some anomalies out there, but that would strike me as really unusual that those houses would have.
Irrigation wells, maybe.
There's no drinking wells. I want to say that there is a well on one of those properties. We talked to them a little bit when we had the flooding, but it's more of an irrigation well.
Right.
That's what I'm thinking.
And it's quite a ways down gradient. So again, this short circuiting is more of a shallow short circuiting or reduction. So.
Right, so
and you know, you're at the bottom of the.
Those wells are probably at least 100 feet lower than this property.
Oh yes,
at least 100 feet. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we got Betty Schallberger and Sparkle Maxwell.
Good evening. I have lived at Forest Edge.
You are?
I'm Betty Schallberger, and I live at Forest Edge.
Okay.
I've been there for over about 5 years now, and I have an historical perspective because I was there before Mr. Jameson took over the apartment complex as ownership. The difference is remarkable in terms of when I need something fixed, it gets fixed right away. Before, it took quite a while, and sometimes it almost felt like you had to justify that it really was broken to even get it fixed. So that wasn't real helpful. I hadn't lived in an apartment since 1981 when I was in graduate school. So the whole learning curve was huge about what apartment life is like now. It's very different. I didn't even have a smoke detector in the apartment when I was in graduate school. I can tell you I have 3 in my apartment now, and they work really well because they went off when I burned a batch of Christmas cookies. But in terms of just the difference of the property, and I've also watched all the work gone on since 2016, and obviously a lot of effort's gone on. I actually have some background in geology, so I'm understanding most of what they were talking about, and understand about the dewatering system that they put in place, and so I have some support for at least them making a real faith effort and a very technical scientific effort to solve the problem. Your turn.
Hi, I'm Sparkle Maxwell, and that's my real name. Anyways, I've lived in Oregon City for almost 25 years.
And the processes that I've seen this apartment complex go through and living in Oregon City for that long, from when it was Knoll Creek to now, has been huge. The last couple of years, there's been so much more stuff to make this property better in the future instead of the way it was before. I know for a long time it was like a thorn, and these guys have really worked to make it look like a rose instead. So I really appreciate the stuff that they've put in place already.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Louise Edwards and Kylie Murphy.
Hi, my name is Louise Edwards. I'm the general manager at Forest Edge. I've been there since July of 2014. Was very surprised when we had to evacuate 3 days before Christmas. That was definitely the hardest week I've ever had in property management. I would not be there if RJL Holdings had not bought it. I would have left. The last owners were doing nothing that I was asking. It was very hard apologizing to tenants all day when things weren't done. They've just made all kinds of improvements. They're very generous. We have a lot of community events. I'm very passionate about having a safe community with the history that Forest Edge has had. That has not been easy to overcome. I'm very excited about opening again and getting the lower campus open. And they're just awesome employers. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Kylie Murphy. I've lived in Oregon City for 17 years now, and growing up, my best friend actually lived in Forest Edge. She was in the lower half, had to be evacuated when everything slid down the hill, and knowing the provisions they've put in place to fix everything, my husband and I were both comfortable to still come to the community knowing that they were working on fixing it. And I've seen both sides of the maintenance, because when we first moved in, it was the old maintenance team, and 2 weeks after we moved in, Frank took over, and things have gone much faster. And like, I had my garbage disposal break, and he was there within 5 minutes to fix it, even though it wasn't a necessity. They're just phenomenal, and I feel comfortable having my kids there. Like Louise says, there's all the family functions, and I've taken my kids to every single one of them, and I have two very young kids. I have a 4-month-old and an almost 1-year-old. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Neely.
I'm Doug Neely. I'm the chair of the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council. 24 years ago, I ran for the first time for the city commission on the basis of being a friend of Newell Creek when these developments were permitted to go through. You've lost houses, you've lost apartment units, you've lost roads, sewer systems, all of this in the Newell Creek, Abernethy Creek area. It's hard to argue against improvements being made that's going to reduce the risk at in these apartments. I guess I'm concerned when those original developments were going in, there was a city consultant that was brought in as a city geologist, independent of the reports that were being made by the developers. My hope is that you would consider bringing somebody independent of the developers to look at these plans. And I don't know if that's in the plans or not, but I think it ought to be considered. You ought to look at somebody independent. I'm concerned about the statement of a single annual report. I think if you've got a monitoring system going on, it should be reported to the city what those monitoring systems are saying during the whole rainy season. An annual report at the end, it might not give you any clue as to the activities that are going on. I think there has to be more than that. The other concern I guess I have is nothing to do with the landslides per se. Those are relatively affordable apartments, but I presume this big investment that's being made, they're going to recoup their costs in some manner or another. And whether, in fact, those, with every, it's a great area. I mean, it's a beautiful area. If it didn't have landslides, I might like to live in that area. But I'm concerned that, in fact, what will happen is that those housing units will no longer be affordable. And there's a tremendous lack of affordable housing in the whole region, and including in Oregon City. But I guess the thing that I'd really like to emphasize, I think you'd be well served by having an independent evaluation of this plan and see what's going on. I said that was done before any of these developments were going on. Unfortunately, the city commission ignored the advice of the independent consultants the city hired and went on to approve all those developments.
Well, we heard from the city's independent geotech at the beginning of this conversation.
Was that right?
Yeah, you said right there.
Excuse me. My apologies then. My apologies then. In any case, I am concerned about simply having a separate annual report. Our interest in reducing landslides is very specific for the Oregon City Watershed Council. Can I have just a minute more?
Sure.
We're actually going to be making a $200,000 investment into Laurel Newell Creek Canyon over the next 2 or 3 years to actually improve the rearing habitat and the spawning habitat in that area. Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife recognizes that as a steelhead spawning area. The waters going into Abernathy are cool. Abernathy Creek gets very warm, and that's a place where juvenile fish going out would seek refuge from the warm waters into a cooler Creek Canyon. So it is a tremendous natural resource from that perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse Buss.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Jesse Buss. I'm a local resident. In a prior career, I was a biologist. I don't claim any special expertise in that now, but it still holds my interest. And I was struck by some of the comments earlier by the public about aquifers and groundwater recharge. And I was looking at Chapter 1749, and I see that the top 2 priorities for the Natural Resource Overlay District are to protect and restore streams and riparian areas for the ecologic functions and as open space amenities for the community. And 2, protect floodplains and wetlands and restore them for improved hydrology, flood protection, aquifer recharge, and habitat functions. Our code defines aquifer as a geologic formation, group of formations, or part of a formation that contains sufficient saturated permeable material to yield significant quantities of water to wells and springs. I haven't looked through all of the documents, but I looked through a lot of them, and I don't see any discussion about impacts on aquifer recharge. Not at all. It might be there, and certainly during rebuttal they could offer that. But if they're drawing down the water tables to below the historic minimum summer levels, that means we're getting less water into Newell Creek during the driest months of the year, where there are imperiled fish species that need cold water from the aquifer. So to the extent that that's relevant to your determination, maybe you'd be interested in finding out more information about aquifer impacts. Thank you.
Isn't this unnamed stream that we're discharging this stormwater into is a tributary of Newell Creek, is it not?
Yes, that's stated.
And so you're not losing any water in Newell Creek because the stuff that's being drawn down is going into this creek that's going down to Newell Creek and eventually to Abernathy, right?
Mr. Mayor, I think it depends on the timing of the release. And you've got your heavy rain events during the winter that raises the stream level. But if you have aquifers that are fully recharged, you have more water coming out of the ground during the summer months. So this project, I think, just using logic from what's been presented, will result in lower water levels during the summer.
Okay.
And potentially influence stream temperatures too.
All right, that's it for the public comment. Is there anybody else who wants to comment on this? And we're going to move on. Rebuttal. was trying to see, yeah. So applicants rebuttal. So if you,
I'd like to rebut on a few items, I guess. Firstly, the elevation of the creek in the vicinity of the lower campus, based on what I can glean from a topographic map, is it's about 175 to 200 feet elevation. The lowest dewatered elevation that we have is 221 feet. So it's higher than the stream. So it's not like we're dewatering this and causing water to not discharge to the creek potentially. But I will say that we've also monitored water levels at the upper campus. And throughout our dewatering efforts on the lower campus, we have very little effect on the upper campus. Over several years, the water levels are consistent at the upper campus. So that gives you a rough radius of what kind of effect we're having on any of the aquifers in the vicinity of the lower campus. It doesn't extend that far. And that makes sense with the fine-grained soils that we're trying to dewater. If it were a sand and gravel, we might see a much broader area of effect, but we don't. So as far as whether we're diminishing off-site or substantial amounts of the aquifer, I don't think that's accurate. I think it's very restricted. And we're just having a very pointed, localized effect where we want it. As far as vegetation goes, I know that there's some concern about if we dewater the hillside, might we be cutting off some of the water that would reach the vegetation and cause mortality of that. My response to that is the lower portion of the lower campus, sorry for the redundancy there, but it's pretty treeless, and that's because it's unstable. And in fact, that's one of the indicators that geologists use in order to identify landslides, is where don't we have trees, because the ground is so unstable it won't support a root wad. If we were to stabilize this landslide, it may actually gain tree canopy. So we'd increase the quality of the vegetation of the hillside simply because we cause it to be more stable. You know, there will be some monitoring involved, and I can let, others speak to that better than me as far as the requirements for that. But just on a conceptual level, we might do better just by stabilizing the slide to the vegetation cover.
Yeah, I think the only other point that was the frequency of reporting, through the wet season. We do have the alarm system that alerts us, but in terms of reporting back to the city, I think there is some, as conditions, part of the conditions of approval, that they have, the city staff has to, approve some of those documents and the requirements for reporting that we have to meet, I believe, is part of the OMP operating and maintenance program. And that's a requirement. They could say, hey, we'd like to see a bi-monthly, status update or something. I mean, we really don't want to get into something that's onerous. As I said before, we're the guys that are most incentivized to keep this thing running. It is our property. That's, any property owner should have the same financial incentive to protect this property.
okay, and no, in your earlier presentation, you never answered my question about, or somebody needs to answer the question about, how are you treating this water before it gets discharged?
There you go, Brian.
Brian Lee with Pace Engineers, and I can answer that question. When we deal with stormwater, we essentially have two things we're looking at, quality and quantity, and your question specifically addresses quality of the stormwater runoff. And our system consists of three basic parts that deal with that. The first is the actual catch basins that are surrounding, that we're going to be installing around the parking lot area. They're lynch-style catch basins, and they're designed to prevent oil that may go into them from going out the discharge pipe, and they also trap floatables like cigarette butts and pop bottles and things like that in those lynch-style catch basins. Then the water flows from the catch basins to a stormwater filter, and that is a vault, probably about 12 feet by 6 feet, that has cartridges inside of it. And those cartridges are designed to absorb any pollutants that are in the runoff. And the advantage of that system is that we can adjust what cartridges we put in there to address specific pollutants that we may want to remove. So currently we've designed it for what we traditionally would have in terms of oil and runoff from a parking lot and apartment complex. But we could adjust that as needed going forward. The third piece is the water quantity, and that's the stormwater vault itself. It's consisted of several rows of pipes that are buried in the ground. That keeps them from heating up in the summertime or be affecting the water temperature because it's all underground. And they detain the runoff and they only release it at the required rate of the pre-development rate. That's according to the code.
Okay, thank you.
I think there was also a question about water temperature, the effect of the system on water temperature in the stream.
It shouldn't, because we've put everything underground and it's not subject to radial heating.
Okay. Commissioner, have any questions for these guys?
I'll make some comments, but I can wait and defer to others first, and I'll sit back if there's others.
I don't have questions, no.
You do?
I don't, not for these
Okay.
gentlemen.
Anybody else?
No.
So you got a question, Frank?
It's actually a statement, and I want to give this to you and to everybody present, because these statements are excerpts from the geodesign report of the 19th, which I believe refers to an earlier, much larger report in 2018. And there's a number of statements in there that cause me concern. I'm going to read a select few from them, and anybody that wants these, and we can put them in the record as we should, because I'm not going to read everyone in here tonight. Maybe you could respond to some of these. And these are the things that give me concern. And I'm speaking as both a commissioner and as a citizen of this community. One of the statements is that off-site areas that could be affected by the lower campus include the Berry Hill Apartments, the upper campus, and the Newell Creek Stream Channel. So the Newell Creek Stream Channel has already been mentioned. So I'll mention that. Some of these I'm going to emphasize more than others. There's a statement about erosion of the slope toe along Newell Creek is a natural process that likely cannot be prevented without the installation of a rock buttress. I won't read that statement in its entirety, but I'll give it to you gentlemen to review. One that I do want to read entirely, and that gives me cause for concern, is a statement from this report that says this area may continue to show signs of slope instability even after the majority of the lower campus landslide is stabilized by the dewatering system due to the abundant slide blocks and secondary scarps still needing to achieve an equilibrium position after the main slide has stopped moving. Now that's from your report, so I'm taking excerpts, and I admit I'm being selective. This is the part that concerns me for the safety of this community and for future residents. And I do appreciate the endorsement of you and your management style from your tenants. That's very notable. Thank you. It talks about the instability and surface drainage that transmission pipes through the lower campus and roadway have been affected by ground watering. And of course, there's a statement where the dewatering system is absolutely necessary. The level of comfort that the report states is that the proposed project, constructed in accordance with the recommendations presented in this comprehensive report and supplemental reports, is reasonably likely to be safe. And I don't know if that gives me the level of proof that I'm comfortable with, reasonably. The next statement from the very same report concerns me even more, because that report says this is geodesign, we anticipate that the watered landslide could still require time to reach an equilibrium position. And if it is influenced by uncontrolled surface water infiltration and groundwater pressures from off-site migration into the lower campus subsurface. And finally, maybe this is a typical disclaimer in the last sentences of the report from Geodesign. Our report, our conclusions, and our interpretations should not be construed as a warranty of the subsurface conditions. So those are the elements that give me concern as a commissioner. I can tell you I entered into this with an open mind. I wasn't party to the previous events, the landslide. I try to approach things scientifically and as an engineering type person. But those statements in the very supportive report that summarizes a previous larger report give me concern. And I'll put this in the record, and you gentlemen can have a copy, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Then,
Can you give us like 2 minutes to just talk? Because I understand that well, when I get up and say.
that'd be good.
Hi, Kelly Hosseini, Miller Nash. I am the attorney for RJO Holdings.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise. Yeah, so we haven't asked to leave the record open. There didn't seem to be anything up until you kind of brought up your issues that seemed necessary for us to leave the record open. But it sounds like you're expecting some sort of response.
I'm putting it out there for
to that.
consideration by this commission when they make a decision tonight.
Okay, so what I would like is just 2 minutes to talk to my folks about whether or not they'd like to keep the record open so they can.
Let's do this. Let's take 7 minutes.
Okay.
Everybody can use the restroom or whatever.
Okay.
You guys can have time, and then we'll come back. So we'll come back at 20. So.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Would you like a copy of this?
Public hearing is still open at this point.
And the key elements are in red.
Okay.
reconvene. The public hearing is still open. We've done that. So you've had your rebuttal.
Well, they
I
wanted
believe
more
they wanted to
time.
respond to this.
Sure, respond to that. Come on up.
I want to do a few things. So since I authored a lot of these reports, it's probably appropriate for me to say some things about what you highlighted. At least a couple of them fall within the unfortunate litigative world that we live in, right?
No doubt.
Our report conclusions and interpretation should not be construed as a warranty. That is a statement we have to put in our reports because otherwise we don't have professional insurance. They flat out say we have to put it in there.
Understood.
You know, when we make a statement like it is reasonably likely to be safe, that again is part of that portion of being an engineer or a geologist as a consultant in the world we're in. So, understood. There were some comments regarding the lower portion of the lower campus requiring perhaps some time to find its equilibrium, right? And that just is because of the way the landslide has slipped over time. There's a relatively cohesive block where the apartments are located, and that's why the apartments are still habitable. And then there's the portion past that has experienced greater disruption. And because of that, it will take a little bit of time for that to find its equilibrium, even after we've put in the dewatering system. You know, let's see. I mean, overall, it's something that if we were to find that the system we have is inadequate, first of all, the displacements that occurred previously were on the order of an inch to perhaps a couple of inches during an event. There's an opportunity for us to respond to this before things would go catastrophic, right? I mean, that's the whole point. It's a slow moving landslide. We have the option, as we've discussed previously, to put more dewatering wells in the system to have a greater effect. But Brian, I don't know if you want to bring up the point about how the dewatering or the surface water.
Yes, one of the concerns that staff had was some of your concerns too about how some of the edge conditions might affect the underground utilities. That we do anticipate some level of a little bit of settlement as things kind of come into equilibrium. And we've built into the system flexible connections at those key shear points for all of the utilities. So it will offer some ability of that natural settlement, if you will, to occur without totally disrupting the utilities.
Okay. And what effect would you say, is it positive or a negative effect of the work that was done as far as retaining wall for the Bear Hill apartments?
I would say that had a different focus. While we're dealing with a portion of the same reactivation, that wall is intended to retain a portion of the ancient landslide and keep it in place. And so the intent of that was to cut it off. And effectively, if everything were to continue to fail, that would hold steady. And so the only impact that it might have on the lower campus of Forest Edge would be if any of its stormwater was not being appropriately routed away from the slope. You know, and that's something I'm sure they thought of.
Okay.
Or I hope they thought of.
And I'm not even trying to be argumentative. I appreciate every effort you're making, and I appreciate the engineering effort. I still look at this one statement that the area may continue to show signs of slope instability even after the effects of stabilization due to the watering system. So you're removing one factor and are trying to. And in the end, there actually is no one identifiable factor that will make us comfortable that will not slide in the future. I mean, nobody can say simply by the removal of the water, we know this will be a stable area because of other factors that you cannot address, the plates and such, the slide areas. You looked at me like you didn't understand that.
You mentioned plates. I'm trying to.
Well, you're talking about these.
Slide blocks, I think.
Slide blocks is how I refer to them by another term.
Okay.
Slide blocks. Those are my comments, and that's what, and you responded as well as you could to it. As I said, they're quotations from your report, and I do understand the legal world in which we live.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions or concerns for the applicant?
I guess I just have one statement.
Go ahead.
So, full disclosure, I used to work for the Department of Geology for about 5 years. And so I'm well aware of their landslide products and the geology work that goes on in that agency. I guess my concerns are general in nature for the entire site, not just this lower piece that we're talking about, just because the entire site is sitting on a landslide. We haven't talked at all about earthquake shaking and the fact that that can trigger a landslide. I know we're talking a lot about water, and because that was the event that triggered this one event. Truthfully, this property, if we could go back, years, we should have never built houses on it if we were using the technology that we have today and knowing that there was a landslide there, and knowing that the probability of a slide is going to go up since it's sitting on an ancient landslide, given that, earthquake shaking will happen, particularly for a Cascadia event. So my concerns are in general about the whole site, not just about the dewatering piece. So I guess the only thing I would say for you to consider when you, property owner, when you're talking to your residents, one thing when I worked at Degami was we never used the word safe. That was a word that we never said, wasn't allowed to be said. Because as soon as you start telling people that they are safe, I think you open yourself up to some challenges and a comfort that maybe people need to be aware of, that they are on a landslide. If an earthquake happens, there could be more sliding. Just full disclosure, let's just be aware that if you're deciding to live on a hazard area, that there's some responsibility there. So just some comments just from my background. And I get your comments about your disclosures and saying reasonably likely, and kind of you work with those terms. That was one for Degami, is that we never use the word safe. So give that some thought into how you communicate with your residents. So.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions for the applicant? No. Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we will
I have some
deliberate.
process information before you deliberate, if that's okay. All right, so again, this application is for permitting the dewatering that's already in place, installing stormwater to deal with the above ground water, and then also that emergency access. You have three options: approve with conditions, or deny. In all cases, we want to make sure that we have findings that are connected to the approval criteria that are being proposed. If you want to add conditions or add findings, our recommendation was for approval of conditions. If the commission is going the other way, we will need you to talk a lot about what criteria that's associated with so we can get you the proper findings before you make the decision. I did hear some concerns regarding the maintenance and a potential condition for 5-year maintenance. We can write a condition for you should you need that. And then also there was some concern about the frequency of reporting during the winter season. Condition of approval number 1 is for the maintenance and operations plan, and there is flexibility for that, for us to address that within the condition as it's written already. Basically, the city has to approve the operations and maintenance plan anyway, so if we need to put in more frequency during the winter months, we can do that under the existing language. But we're here to answer any questions that you have.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you were going, the one last piece. If you were going towards a denial, I would think about what it means for the dewatering that's in place. Does that come out? And then staff obviously has a concern if that was to be removed. But this one's a tricky one because part of the stuff is already in place.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So, unlike normally, I'm going to go first this time. I have to say that coming into this, I was extremely skeptical that you could prove to me that you've done the necessary work to reopen this facility. Having said that, you have got me on that. I think that the plan is solid. You've got good folks working for you in engineering. Your geotech guys is great. And while we're dealing with this homeless crisis and affordability crisis, it seems to me that given that the buildings are already there and the plan does seem to, being staff thinks that they've met their obligations, it seems to me like we should go ahead and approve this. So, Commissioner Lyle Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Mr. Kvaisman. The indemnity following the Oso landslide up in Washington, I think jurisdictions were challenged with how do we handle that? I assume that indemnity has become the common practice. Do we know for sure that that actually absolves the city from liability? And, sorry, part two, would it cover the entire site versus just the lower site?
Let me answer them in reverse order. Answer part two, and partially I haven't seen the indemnity yet, so I couldn't answer that. But generally, I would think it would cover the lower site because that's where the work is being done. And if I were the owner, I'd be reluctant to indemnify for the entire site, given that they didn't do the geotech work there. We can certainly talk to them about that, but because that's where the focus is. In terms of the Oso landslide and the concern, I mean, the reality is, if we had a situation like the Oso landslide, what we have is an indemnity from the owner of the property. If they're like most sophisticated real estate companies, it will be a single-purpose LLC that the sole asset will be this property itself. And if, in fact, we have a landslide, that property is likely going to have little value, if not negative value, at the end of it. And so, the indemnity is good for small events, where it can continue to operate and there's still value in it. To the extent we have a massive event, I think the indemnity really, there's nothing that the property owner is going to be able to give you.
I guess my concern is, would any of the residents of the property be able to bring a lawsuit against the city for allowing the development, or at least maybe this lower piece of the development to continue?
Yeah. So could they bring a lawsuit against the city?
Well, I know they could.
Yeah.
But
would they be likely to prevail?
Right.
I don't. Go ahead and say it. It depends.
That's really what it comes down to. Without knowing what happens in it, if in fact, hypothetically, to a certain extent, we would have discretionary immunity because the city made a decision based on, made a conscious policy decision to allow this to move forward, knowing the risks. In discretionary immunity is a complete wild card. I could tell you that I can read 5 cases that have entirely different approaches. I don't think if we have a bunch of, again, if it's a small event and a property owner sued the city for allowing this, yes, we could turn to the property owner. They could be able to indemnify the city. To the extent it's a larger one, there's just not going to be anything there. So.
Okay.
And I think Mr. Lewis had a clarification on the indemnification.
Right, the indemnification applies against tax lot, and so it's the entire lot in this case, which includes the upper apartments as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I guess just add a little bit to what Bill said is we'd face those same risks if the lower site wasn't stabilized. And I guess my point there is if we don't deal with the site in a positive way, then those risks could change the upper site as well. And then we're kind of back to trying to figure out, what Bill would think about, that same risk as far as the city's liability.
No, I agree. And I mean, the entire site sits on the active, ancient, deep-seated landslide. So, It's the whole site. I guess the last comment I'll make is that I agree with the mayor. I think the property owner has really you've done a great job of putting in your due diligence. I do agree. I'd love to hear from renters and people that live there that applaud their manager, because that certainly is not everywhere. And I guess it was interesting this discussion about affordable housing, and I'll try to make my comments very brief. If these buildings didn't already exist, I would probably have the opposite comment of what everybody else has said, and I would be concerned about us building affordable housing in a hazard area. So I think any future development where buildings don't exist, we need to be really conscious of that, are we just putting affordable housing, in hazard areas, and make sure we're not doing that. But these buildings already exist, and so I don't feel like we're negatively impacting a vulnerable population or trying to skew in that direction. So overall, I agree with moving forward with approval with conditions.
Mr. Roy, if this site had been applied for last year, say it was Fairland, would we have allowed an apartment complex to be built there under our current code?
It's a really big statement. The use allows apartment complexes. The site, we would have them do geotech reports, and we would have geotech reports, and we would take a look at where it is appropriate to place the buildings.
That was nice.
Thank you.
I think, today we have different standards as it relates to how much density can be built on a steep slope, how much impact you can have on a natural resource buffer. I think, potentially you can always build something, usually on a tax lot. It would probably look much different.
Right. And that's the point I was trying to get to, is that the code that we have today doesn't anywhere recognize the code that we had when these things were built.
Well, and the information about hazards has come a long way.
Right.
I mean, with the development of LiDAR, we're able to map landslides that we've never seen or known about for years, so, yeah.
So is there any further discussion from the commission? Is there a motion?
There's no discussion? Sure.
I guess, I think I should make my statement. For all the reasons I stated in this memo, as much as I admire what we're trying to do here, and I understand the effect on housing, and I admire that, but for the reasons I stated in these excerpts from the geodesign memo, and for the reasons that Commissioner Rachel Al Smith initially stated about other conditions that exist on the site, my level of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, and my level of confidence is not high enough that I will not be voting approval. So if you wanted findings, those are my findings and the reasons as stated in the memo and as vocalized by Commissioner Rachel Al Smith about other conditions existing at the site.
Okay. So, can I address that, I guess?
Go ahead.
I would ask that the commission consider, especially if others are thinking similarly, that the question about what happens if this vote changes is also a pretty big one that I'm not quite sure where that plays out. As the property owner, they've got this question about what do we do with the dewatering wells if it's not approved. Right now, they've got approval through an emergency to have those dewatering wells there. The existing buildings, removal of the existing buildings, or whatever is going to happen to those existing buildings is another significant question about what we do with this site. I guess those questions are significant, and especially when we have such a positive solution that's being presented tonight. I think the other thing that kind of is being missed in this is that I've been there throughout since 2006. We've watched this thing move over the years, and I've watched the maintenance that the last property owner didn't tend to along that site. And while this is a deep set slide and a lot of the subsurface water is really the solution and the long-term solution for this, I remember watching surface water coming from around both on the upper site and the lower site, just pouring into these crevices or cracks, or I don't know what the appropriate geologic term is for that, but we just watched that. Water systems that were severed. I mean, the reason is for this development to have been deemed dangerous buildings was mostly about the utilities. The buildings themselves, there were signs of some indication of doors not quite, things not being aligned, but for the most part, these buildings are pretty much stable from the foundation up. And so there's a lot of discussion when we talk landslides about the lubrication that kind of lubricates those slip planes. And in this case, I'm sure that the saturated groundwater, because we've heard from this geotech, other geotechs as well, and Tim as well, there's a certain level of rainfall in the state of Oregon. And when we hit that amount of accumulated rainfall, things start moving in not just Oregon City and other places as well. And I think, that's the kind of condition that we were in when this thing really kind of kicked off. But to add to that, in this case, we had an irresponsible property owner who was just allowing stormwater to, just dump straight into those places where you don't want it. And usually we cover things with plastic. We get them to do things to kind of bridge this. The gaps were too big in this case. So I understand the risks associated with it. I'm really concerned about the risks associated with a plan that is unsustainable for even a well-backed property owner as to how do you deal with that. So that was kind of my thoughts.
If I could respond and pose a question. Those planes or those shear planes are at deep depths, 45 to 80 feet. So they are what they are. My question is RJL Holdings, are they the owner of the upper campus also?
It's all one tax lot.
Well, okay, I just want to make sure, because I'm getting this feeling that if these guys walk away from these wells, we then endanger the upper campus. Is that the message you're trying to send?
From what I've understood is this lower campus in that large block, support me if you can, but that large block, if it continues to move, it could impact that upper campus. Mm-hmm. And so solving this lower campus not only solves that lower campus and that block from moving, but it
stabilizes the upper.
So having said that, why would RJL Holdings not continue to use these wells, these water systems, to stabilize their existing investment above?
Because they're only temporarily permitted.
This application allows them the authority to continue to use them. They put them in without this process because it was an emergency, and now this is the process to write that, to officially allow those to stay.
So they would continue to operate to protect the upper campus? Is that what you're saying?
So the application is for all the dewatering, also to install a stormwater system to deal with the above ground water, and to do an emergency access. The application has nothing to do with allowing the buildings to be reoccupied. Totally separate, although there is a connection there. This would be one among multiple steps. If the commission were to deny the application, that means that those dewatering wells would come out. If you want to keep them in, you would improve it with conditions or something like that. So the recommended approval with conditions would allow the dewatering wells to stay in, as well as the installation of the stormwater and the access road, and that's it. This one's just tricky because normally you get to decide before it's in. In this case, it's already in because of the landslide.
So by allowing the watering wells to protect the upper campus, we're not giving them carte blanche to reoccupy or market the lower campus?
That's correct. There is a letter in the record from the building official that identifies a series of steps that are needed, including approval from geotechs and structural engineers and mold testing and you name it,
fire department. So there are multiple steps in order to gain occupancy, and ultimately the occupancy is granted by the building official through the state of Oregon. So it's a little bit disconnected from the commission anyway.
So I would think our jail holdings would want to maintain operation of those, at least protect their upper campus no matter what.
We fully intend to.
I have a question about procedural, because I'm getting confused here. So I'm assuming we've closed the public hearing and we're in deliberations right now.
And I closed the public hearing.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I just want to get a procedural question answered. So were you trying to answer a question that he had? Because I didn't hear an answer in there. I heard a little bit of rah rah zip boom bah for the applicant. And I didn't hear you ask a question. So I'm just confused about where we were.
Right. I didn't hear a question either. What I heard was a statement that indicated that of how Commissioner O'Donnell was planning to vote on this. And I wanted to make sure that, because I hadn't heard from others, so I just kind of wanted to make sure my rah-rah had a little bit of more understanding than I think was stated.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Dan. I just was trying to figure out where all the balls were, and we had people speaking for the audience, and I thought it was closed.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Well, quite honestly, I just wanted to ensure that I don't want to give permission to build or occupy those buildings in the lower campus. Obviously, we want to take whatever steps currently exist or will continue to exist to protect their investment and the safety of our residents on the upper. If that's what I'm voting on, to allow them to continue the operation of these wells, that's one thing. If I'm voting on allowing them occupancy to move on and do those, then it's a different vote.
You are not voting on occupancy.
All right.
But it doesn't ever come back to this commission before occupancy, and that's the problem.
It does
We
not.
called it up because of the question of occupancy.
That's right.
I think that there needs to be an assumption that if this application in its entirety is approved or approved with conditions, that the next step would be to move through the building code process towards occupancy.
The applicant could also come back, correct me if I'm wrong, and say we would like to operate these pumps in the future under a different criteria, which is to protect our investment in the upper campus.
That would be a different discussion.
All right, I understand the vote. Thank you.
Separate that.
Well, the application is to install the pumps and have the pumps work, and then to get rid of the stormwater. It's less for the intent of the purpose of that, it's for the actual installation of the pumps.
Okay, so let me say this, all right? And that is that if we're gonna try to deny this application, we've gotta have something more than, I just don't want people to be living down there as a criteria. Right. And it seems to me that these folks have met all of the criteria they were asked to meet by city staff. And we very often make these statements that, wow, we don't want to overrule the planning commission because they've done all this work. Well, city staff has done a ton of work on this. These folks have done a ton of work. I know that John Lewis and the other folks have had an interest in this. And the staff has come back and told us that they believe that this can work. So I'm questioning how we could deny this application and expect it to survive LUA.
Yeah, I agree, because I think if you'd have to be voting to deny based on the merits of the application.
Right. So is there a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve PC 20-004 Forest Edge Apartment Stabilization with approvals, with conditions. Approval with conditions, as stated in the staff report.
And would we be adding the maintenance agreement condition?
I think the maintenance agreement condition's already in there, right?
It was the 5-year, $100,000 bond. If you wanted to add it, we could add a condition that says the applicant shall complete a 5-year maintenance bond for the dewatering system.
Fine.
Sure.
Is there a second? Reminding you that we have to have some real condition in order to deny this application.
You didn't ask for a vote, you asked for a second.
Right. Well, without a second, we don't have a vote. And without a vote, these folks have every right and ability to take us to LUBA. And we'll probably lose. So beyond the motion, what are you basing this on?
Based it on the statements that I made prior in this meeting.
I understand, Frank.
So you know.
Just for the purposes of getting it on the floor.
Thank you.
You want me to say it again?
First and then second every year.
Call the roll.
Do you want to say something? Say something.
Well, I have a couple. First of all, I have several concerns about comments made regarding aquifer and all of that, which, we clearly don't have a lot of answers for. These criteria listed here, geologic hazards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the comments from the citizens apply to some of these criteria. I think the comments from Commissioner Smith also apply to some of those criteria. I'm curious though about the reference, the criteria referring to our off-street parking and the, what is the criteria of off-street parking and what does it say, loading?
Loading.
What is that?
So our site plan design review, basically the section our site plan design review that talks about parking lots is in the 1752 chapter. And so when you were looking at the access road, that's the section of site plan design review that we look at, which is that basically you're extending the access road of the parking lot.
What's loading?
Oh, that's the off-street parking and loading is the name of the chapter. So when you're looking at site plan design review, you might have parking areas, loading areas, all the areas of a parking lot. That's just the name of the chapter.
There is no loading area proposed.
There is no loading area in this. This is the fire access road, which is part of the parking lot.
So in this plan, is there going to be a ring around the lower yard just like there is up in the upper? Okay.
Connecting the rings.
Just for emergency access though, right?
Correct.
Hold on.
So the day-to-day cars will not be using the ring, but fire access will be able to be using that so they will not have to back up.
You're making me dizzy.
Yeah.
Sorry. Close your eyes for one moment while we flip through these slides.
There we go. So if we look.
So the main traffic pattern is going to be down the hill to the left.
Main traffic pattern will be down the hill and then back up, whereas emergency access vehicles will not have to back up. They'll be able to continue the loop.
Right. So what, is there a gate or something there? How do you prevent people from using it on a daily basis?
There usually is some type of bollard. And I can confirm with engineering, they have specific standards what you install to create a fire access area.
Right.
Either the big gate or a bollard, it's Clackamas Fire District identifies what they utilize.
So we have a motion and a second. If
Did that answer?
someone can articulate actual conditions that aren't being met by this plan, I think that's what we're going to need if we're going to try to deny. And I don't see that we are. I think staff has gone through and looked at all this stuff. We've had our independent geotech look at all this stuff. We've had, an assistant in building looking at this stuff. So while I know a little bit about a lot of things, I'm not a geotech and I'm not an engineer. I'm just a simple little old electrician. And the fact is that our staff has done their work. So we have to take the emotion out of this and say, has the applicant met the conditions in our code to be able to do this work? And that's the only thing we can consider at this point.
And at a later point. I mean, it will never, so I guess my issue is how, because I don't have a problem approving this based on the criteria that we're dealing with tonight, based on the issues that we're dealing with tonight. The problem is it will never come back to us to deal with the other issues that we were concerned about in the first place. So.
Like what?
We just.
Which issues?
What conditions are you talking about?
Well, why did you call it up? Why did we call it up?
We called it up because I needed to be convinced that these folks were going to actually be able to stabilize the site. And to be honest, coming into this thing, I was extremely skeptical.
Right.
And they have convinced me, and they've convinced staff that they're doing everything they possibly can. And they've obviously convinced a whole bunch of professionals in our staff that they've accomplished that mission. My concern always was, if we let people back down into those apartments, are they going to slide down the hill someday?
You still can't say that today.
I can say that with a reasonable surety that this plan, if it's, and once again, everybody signed off on it, I think that beyond catastrophic events like a Cascadia event or, a NOAA-type flood, I think it's going to be stable. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. But I don't see that at this point in time. And I don't see that there's anything that we could ask them to do that hasn't already been done to deny this application.
Well, I guess I still have concerns about comments that were made that I think refer to some of these sections. And I don't know the answers to them. And to me, that has some validity to it until I know the answers to those.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So I reached out to a friend of mine who's a engineering geologist just to ask a general question. Is it possible to mitigate a deep-seated landslide? Just because I wanted to have an outside opinion, a third-party opinion, and they don't know anything about the site. This was totally just a very generic, and I was like, I know this is a loaded question, so if you don't feel comfortable answering, just don't answer. And here's what his response is. I'm happy I can include my scribbles that I put on this email in the record if I need to. He says the answer is yes, but people can engineer a mitigation to stop an existing large, deep landslide from moving, but the issue is usually the cost. The cost of design and construction can be very high, especially considering the following. These types of landslides usually cross multiple properties. This causes many issues, like who is going to pay and how much. Is one owner paying to stabilize an entire neighborhood? The other part to understand is that nothing lasts forever. The mitigation will have a design life, and making sure that design life is equal or more than the house's life will be difficult. And so when I watched the presentation, I also went back today and listened to the December 4th presentation that was made because I was not here for the December 4th meeting when the owners came the first time. And so you talked at the December 4th meeting about the cost and the burden and how you were, the fact of how you could easily, end up trying to mitigate, all of these surrounding apartment complexes and stuff if, how it could easily get out of control. And you kind of talked about some of that stuff. And this was the most compact, best way to protect your property and and I could only imagine the amount of cost burden that these folks have been putting into this. So, only someone who could handle that burden of the cost for design and construction would be in here doing this work. And I felt like tonight's presentation answered the question about, one, maintenance and the life of the product and their commitment to continue maintaining the system and the fact that it's going to be carried over to future property owners. So just a little bit more of things I was looking for when I came into tonight, and me asking, is it even possible? Are there mitigation techniques to stabilize a deep-seated landslide? And the answer was yes. So that gave me a little more comfort. And I didn't mention dewatering. I didn't mention any, it was just a very open-ended question of, is it possible to engineer, a solution for a deep-seated landslide? So if that brings you any comfort, it did me. So.
Further discussion? Call the roll.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith. Aye. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
No.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
I would have really liked to hear from Commissioner McGriff, honestly, to know where she's coming from, because we didn't hear anything from her, so that concerns me. Based on my concerns with the comments from the audience that I feel apply to some of these criteria, and not knowing what Commissioner,
Thanks for putting that.
well, I abstain.
Commissioner McGriff.
I understand your concern. I have been uncharacteristically quiet because I know more about this site than I ever cared to know about it in my entire life. I will say that I read everything that was submitted. I read the staff report several times. It's very comprehensive and very detailed. And I still have concerns. It's not anything that I feel that the staff or applicant can really address. It's just my gut. I think that humankind in general can engineer anything that they think they can engineer, and I really commend the applicants for all the work that they've done. I am still not comfortable. I know that this dewatering system has been working so far, but I feel a concern for the future. The future is very uncertain. I don't know what it's going to bring. I looked at the rain coming down today. I'm just not comfortable, and I'm very sorry. I'm going to vote no.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. Motion does not carry. So what is your pleasure? Laura, what's our timeline?
1 moment. The city is obligated to identify a final decision by February 24th of 2020. So your decision by February 24th. If there's additional information we can provide.
What Mr. Arway said is that to help the commission get to a decision, there can be a motion for denial. There could be, is there additional information that you'd like us to try to bring back? Those are kind of the two options that I see.
Commissioner Smith, can you articulate the concerns that you have as far as what audience members said?
I already did, a little bit.
Actually, point of order, have we not already articulated them, each of us individually?
Well,
I mean, the record stands as created.
I guess my question
In general, you have to tie those very specifically to these criteria. I don't know that I have the information enough to do that.
Okay. So where I'm getting at is if the applicant needs to come back and answer questions. They need to know the questions that they need to answer.
Right.
Mayor, I heard from, and Commissioner Rocky Smith, I heard aquifer as a concern, and I felt like that was one area that could be bolstered, if given an opportunity to come back.
Well, the amount of water, so two issues, the aquifer issue, but the amount of water going into the creek. Now, I think the applicant responded to that to some degree that yes, the water is eventually going back into the creek anyway because it's going through this process. The question was timing by one of the citizens about whether or not that happens in a regular process that it would normally happen, or whether or not water is held before it goes back into the creek. How that affects the summer flow into the creek, all that. I mean, clearly those are things that follow under some of these categories of our criteria. I guess I just don't know how. I don't know all the details of these criteria enough to be able to pull out this information and connect it to that, because I would be surprised that the concern of the whole site doesn't fall into geologic hazards that.
So I understand, and we wouldn't expect you to articulate that. So it's helpful to know that a lot of this is about the dewatering of both the, if aquifer is the appropriate term, we'll call it that, and then how that water is put back into the system.
Well,
whether it be the aquifer or back in the stormwater. I think having that direction so that we can work with the applicant to better respond is good feedback.
I don't have a clear understanding of how blacktopping a whole nother section of road affects the site either. I mean, there's no evidence or no reaction to that in terms of runoff and how that affects.
Hold on 1 second. They aren't adding any new impervious surface, are they?
Yes, they are. They're adding an entire street. Are you kidding me?
The emergency access
How can you vote on that if you don't know that? That's the biggest part of the application. They just talked about it before a vote. You asked about it and they showed you on the map just before a vote.
I was, depending on my memory, thinking back to 15, whether there was a road there or not. I apologize for missing that, but you could maybe tone it down just a hair.
No, it's a pretty big miss. So what else have you missed tonight?
Well, let's not start this.
Yeah, I don't want to go there.
So it sounds like we heard concerns regarding the water, how the water level changes within that site, how it affects the sites around it, how the water goes into the stream, and is still a concern regarding the ability to trust the information or how much we can trust that it complies with the criteria.
I submitted this for a reason.
Okay.
It's there for your
We'll
review.
read it.
Okay, so
if the applicant were to come back, I would be very curious if they were going to say, hang on a minute, Commissioner, if we can't have this for the lower campus, we're not going to operate these wells at all. I would be curious if that's their position, or if they're going to continue to operate these wells to protect their investment in the upper campus as a separate matter, not as a matter for decision tonight.
Okay, so where we're going to go here is I will entertain a motion to continue this to date certain of
February 19th, and I request that the record be reopened so we can enter information to address the concerns.
I would like to have that happen sooner.
what?
Have that date set sooner.
The next,
Well, we don't have room on the February 5th agenda.
We're going to be carrying over things from tonight at this rate.
Yeah, I will be out of the country on the 19th.
Well, we're not going to base our meeting plans on whether somebody can be here or not.
you can continue to February 5th.
What all is on that agenda?
I think we tentatively penciled this in if it needed a second hearing. So you're
All right.
February 5th.
So is there a motion for February 5th, date certain?
With the record open?
Yes.
I would so move.
Seconded.
Acclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving on. So we're on to second reading of first and second readings of ordinance number 20-1001 amendments to Oregon Municipal Code 15.04 Building Code declaring an emergency. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. So there is a little bit of process. I'm not just going to ask for second approval. We did receive, as you recall, we closed the record and voted for first reading on December 18th.
Nope, you're on the building code.
Oh, building code. Wrong one. There's too much stuff on. All right. So the city is authorized to implement the building program through the Oregon City Building Codes Division, or BCD. BCD recently made changes to their Oregon Structural Specialty Code. As a result of some of those changes, the city is no longer authorized to regulate certain types of construction, like certain types of retaining walls, freestanding signs, etc. And this proposed regulation to Chapter 15 of the Oregon City Municipal Code will authorize the city to regulate those things. I'm here to answer any questions. We've also proposed an emergency so that this would be the first and second reading. It would be effective tonight. We've talked through these changes both with our development stakeholders group as well as the city commission at the work session previously.
Is there a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move the first and second readings ordinance number 21001 amendments to the Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 1504, Building Code declaring an emergency.
Second.
I'm sorry, I thought I saw a comment on there.
No. Mr. Wiseman.
Ordinance number 20-1001, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City adopting amendments to Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 15.04, Building Code declaring an emergency.
That's one. One more.
We need to vote on the first.
Are we going to vote on these individually? Because that isn't how the motion was made.
Yeah, I made the motion that we do the first, just like it says, first and second readings.
They can be.
Is that legal?
Yeah, you could combine the votes on both of them.
Just read it one more time.
Ordinance number 20-1001, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City adopting amendments to Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 15.04, Building Code declaring an emergency.
Call a roll.
Commissioner Rachel Lau Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. Moving on, 20-009, second reading of ordinance number 19-1014, adopting the stormwater master plan as an ancillary document to the comprehensive plan.
I'd like to have this reopened. We had some additional information that answered some questions that we had last time that we weren't able to get the answer to.
Thank you very much. Do you want me to talk about the reopening of the record a little bit more detail in response to Commissioner McGriff? All right. So the record was closed, and for this item, and actually the second item as well, they're a little bit related, and the commission voted first reading of approval on December 18th. After that, the city received information, and so the commission needs to decide and vote if you want to open the record and accept the information or reject the information. So those are your two options. If you open the record, then the city has both written testimony and verbal testimony to provide. You would listen to that, open the public record for additional public testimony from the public, and then the city would have a chance to respond, and then you can make a decision. If you decide not to open the record, then you can move forward with the second reading. Also, I want to say if you do open the record, we'll probably go back to the first reading again rather than the second reading because you've reopened the record as well.
Can I ask Bill a question, please?
Go ahead.
Bill, if we open the record, can we limit it to just these specific issues?
This is a legislative matter, so you can limit it. The question is whether, I think as the letter that came in was responding to comments that are made after the record was closed. The question is what, legally you can. What you want to do is up to you.
Well, yeah, I just want to make sure it's legal, that we can limit it to the question that was asked that we were unable to get the answer to, and we have some additional information that responds to that question. That would be my request, just to limit it to that particular specific very specific. Not open it up for everything else.
So that's your motion?
Yes.
To reopen the record, limited to that discussion only?
Yes.
I'll second that motion.
Just to be clear, what discussion?
Regarding the letter that we received from NEDC, trying to answer the question that Commissioner O'Donnell had asked about what other cities were doing and how this might be applicable to the city of Oregon City.
We have a motion and a second?
Yes, we do.
Further discussion? Call roll.
Commissioner Rachel L. Smith. Aye. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Aye.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
No.
All right. So now that it is open, we wanted to formally accept the letter from the Northwest Environmental Defense Center, and then also enter a second written comment on behalf of the city. In addition, we'll have a little bit of verbal comment from staff as well. You were John.
Yeah, John, were you gonna?
Right, so the letter that we got from the Northwest Environmental Defense Center, has everybody had a chance to read that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so, it's generally suggesting that the state water quality standards are in other jurisdictions. For the most part, this talked about comprehensive plans. Those same kind of requirements are already in our comprehensive plan. So the question about whether or not these standards, this reference to state water quality standards are listed in a stormwater master plan or design standards wasn't the point of this letter, or that point wasn't made in this letter. And what we have found, and in this email from Krista, so they hadn't seen that email from Krista until just now, is that true?
That is correct.
Okay, so the timing of this is a little bit something that I want to talk about. So I want to say Tuesday, I got an email from Commissioner McGriff suggesting concerns about what the other jurisdictions were doing or whether or not we had answered that question. And because you made the point that had been raised in the last meeting. So at that point in time, I reached out to Krista Runninga, who's with Brown and Caldwell, who, while she's very familiar with our permit, she actually is, Alyssa was here to speak on behalf of Brown and Caldwell last time. So she works with, and actually Alyssa works for Krista, but Krista represents a lot of the regional, in the metro region area governments, and is very familiar with. First of all, we are a phase 1 community, so our stormwater permit is the most seasoned across the state, right? Because we're a phase 1 community. There are several in the state that are phase 2 communities, and they're generally smaller and outside the metro region.
Mean?
What does that mean?
Phase 1, phase 2 community.
Okay, so phase 1 community is all the agencies in the 3 Tri-County areas. It also includes Salem and Eugene. So we have the longest history of having a discharge permit through DEQ. There's also phase 2 communities, and there is a population limit, or they have to be over a certain population to be a phase 2 community, but they're generally the bigger communities, Medford, Ashland, various, they're phase 2 communities. And so she's familiar with a lot of their permits, not all of them, but she looked at the Ashland one in specific, which is a city that Denise raised. And so this is her response to that. So that came in late last night, and then we got this letter, or I got this letter this morning. So we didn't get her to respond to this. She couldn't be here tonight. And so, but from from my read on this and from her response to the question that Commissioner McGriff asked, the city is not doing anything less than any other agency, whether it be Ashland or any other agency. So our charter requires us to meet state water quality standards. The reason why, which is the overarching document that is true, just like will serve the public, right? That's the kind of the general statement that you might see in our charter, but the implementation documents of those are a lot more how you do the work. And that's where our permit, and that's where our standards, our stormwater master plan, all those kinds of things. And in all of those, the reason the other agencies don't list those state water quality standards specifically is because, again, this is back to what we heard last time from Carrie, which is, clear and objective standards. So in our stormwater standards and in our stormwater standards are the main one. We have clear and objective standards that require removal of pollution, and there's specific limits in there. And some of the things that she talked about were, we've got to meet 80% of the average annual runoff, prioritize low-impact development, optimize retention, target pre-development hydrology. There's lots of details in our permit and in our stormwater standards, but listing a kind of a general statement about meeting stormwater quality standards, that specific statement has been problematic, not just in our opinion, but across the region, both the phase 1 and the phase 2 communities. So we feel like we do, and the other thing that Krista shared with us, right now we're in permit negotiations with DEQ, and so there is some discussion about what permit language will be in our next permit. And she felt strongly about how Oregon City has been leading the charge with regard to permit language and stormwater management practices that allow for the kinds of things that we can measure, we can implement, we can hold developers to. So with that, I'm not sure what else to add, but this document here talks about it. If we want to compare to other agencies, we definitely meet that standard.
I guess in plain language, what is so onerous about adding this statement that it's so prohibitive that we're anguishing over adding it?
It's not clear and objective.
Yeah, and I heard Carrie Richter say that. It said the standards are undefined. You can't, and that's our reason.
I mean, and I want to address the NEDC letter a little more explicitly because it talks about, what other municipalities are doing and gives quotes like Corvallis, all development within the Corvallis urban growth boundary should comply with applicable state and federal water quality standards. Ashland, maintain and improve the quality of both surface and groundwater and prohibit new practices cannot meet water quality standards. Klamath Falls, coordinate environmental management. So it's a general statements in their comprehensive plans that say, we have that.
Where is it?
The introduction to chapter 6. The cities.
Is it in the staff report?
It's in the comprehensive plan. No,
I don't have that in front of me.
I apologize. It's not in the staff report. This came in. I was at another hearing, another jurisdiction yesterday and wasn't able to do it. But what I can tell you is that the introduction to chapter 6 of our comprehensive plan says the city's influence over potential impacts from waste can be through direct regulations such as with stormwater treatment standards, through ensuring compliance with federal and state standards, and through actions such as education, development incentives. So we say we're going to ensure compliance with state water quality standards. Going on and actually putting those in as specific, the water quality standards that apply into pipes discharges, instead of relying on the MS4 program, which is specifically designed to deal with stormwater, just causes anomalies that will be problematic for the city to be able to comply with its, to act appropriately manage its stormwater.
Okay, Mr. Voss?
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Jesse Bess, I'm a local resident and a local attorney. I'm not here representing anyone, though. The NEDC letter was not submitted by me, but I'm going to stick to points made in that letter anyway. I appreciate you reopening the record, though since it's a legislative matter, I don't know that it's strictly necessary. You know, it's not a hearing to make a specific site-specific decision, but we appreciate it nonetheless. So, Mr. Lewis brought up that timing has been an issue here, and I very much agree. The reason that this letter was submitted and that I'm here is to respond to some things that were brought up only after the record was closed last time. And that can be very frustrating for the public, including me. What happened last hearing after Ms. Richter submitted a very lengthy memorandum is she then raised new points that were not raised in the memorandum, and to which the public had no opportunity to respond. So it's very nice to have this opportunity. One of those things that Ms. Richter raised, which again was not in her memo, was the idea that the statewide water quality standards are somehow not applicable to Oregon City. So the NEDC letter covers that. Both state statute, the NPDES permit itself, and the OARs contain specific language making those standards applicable. Because of time constraints, I won't go through them, but they're in the letter, you've read them. I haven't heard any counter-argument to the idea that these are applicable based on the statute, the permit, and the OARs. They clearly are applicable. Mr. Lewis also raised this issue of Phase 1 versus Phase 2 cities. Now, I'm not entirely sure, but I think those are references to the federal program. I certainly don't think Phase 1 or Phase 2 is a reference to the Oregon Water Quality Standards Program, having reviewed it a bunch recently. And that makes me want to refocus the conversation again here. We're not talking about the Federal Clean Water Act, MS4, NPDES permit. We're talking about Oregon's separate, independently applicable water quality standards. Mr. Kabaisman said that other cities, recognized other cities like Corvallis say that we'll comply with statewide water quality standards, and then said that Oregon City has similar language, but it's not quite true. Corvallis has that language about complying with water quality standards in its policy language. It's an actual adopted policy in the comp plan. In Oregon City, it's just in our introductory paragraph. It's not an actual stated goal or a policy. It's not the same thing. So I would ask that you adopt that as an actual policy, since this Stormwater Master Plan is part of the comp plan.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So the request is that we simply add that statement at some point in our
comp plan.
It's already in the comp plan.
You know, so you'll notice in the NEDC letter, they have several jurisdictions. Yes, Corvallis has a comprehensive plan policy. Klamath Falls just is page 6.3. Astoria, it's just part of their comprehensive plan. I think the idea that the city is subject to these water quality standards, you've already heard Mr. Buss say they're applicable. You know, this city is subject to these water quality standards, subject to the MS4 permit, subject to these other things. We say in our plan that we want to ensure compliance. I'm not certain what this adds, which makes me nervous. And that's my basic take on it. They say it's applicable, not going to change anything. Then that's fine. Let's leave it the way it is. We say we want to ensure compliance with state and federal water quality standards.
To your knowledge, Mr. Kabaisman, has the addition of this statement by other municipalities caused them and been problematical to them in any legal proceedings?
If what we're talking about is a statement that they've identified in a letter, no. I think what they're actually asking to do is to go beyond those general statements in the water quality standards. I think what they're trying to do is force, as a city standard, those state water quality standards, we would then apply to any development. That goes beyond the general policy stated in these plans and would require the city to implement a water quality program that it doesn't really have the expertise to do. And that's really where I get into the anomalies between the MS4 program as we currently do it and applying these end-of-pipe effluent limitations to all development in the city.
I think we have like a mission or a vision statement, but the actual measurable goals and the how we get to a better water quality standard in Oregon City, there's so many different levels of that, whether it be the kind of pollutants we measure, what level that we treat, what level can we take dirty water from clean water. A lot of the agencies have struggled with percent removals because it's difficult to take clean water and remove to that same percentage as if you were taking dirty water and moving it to clean. So there's just not an infinite, but there's a lot of factors associated with this. And what I will tell you is there's been lots of lawsuits associated with the Clean Water Act and getting agencies like Oregon City and others to comply with language that I think the greater environmental groups would like to see us comply with. And we think the best way to get to the clean water, and we think that because DEQ manages their program this way, that the right way to get there is through a permit, through a stormwater standards, through a stormwater management plan, which isn't before you tonight. It's definitely not in a stormwater master plan. And no, we really don't want that specific, or that language, that general language in our stormwater standards.
I basically I went back and looked at the staff report, and what I was trying to find in the original staff report was the link from the comp plan to the master plan document that talked about in the comp plan how we were going, that we were going to meet these standards. And again, it needs to be, the introduction, what you read doesn't quite get there. So I went back and looked at I didn't have the comp plan, but I looked at the staff report, the original staff report, and looked at the findings, and we're talking about the comp plan, and it just wasn't real clear in the staff report how those things were linking up and how we were going to meet standards. So there's findings, yeah, we do this, we do that. I was looking for some comprehensive plan language that said, this is the comp plan, here's the master plan, this sets it up, this implements it. So that's what I'm looking for. I couldn't find that. So if it's in there, please help me.
Well, Mr. Beisman just read it to you.
That was an introductory, very general statement. So we have comprehensive plan policies that deal with that particular section. So that's what I was trying to find, how those all linked up together.
Is there anything does it add anything to our system if we add these words? Or does it put us in jeopardy of having some other kind of confusion going on?
I think adding what NEDC has asked to be added to it would run the risk of adding additional confusion and making the city responsible enforcing the state water quality standards and running a program that we don't have the expertise to run.
Okay. If we put something in the comp plan language that says that's what you think that's going to do?
Well, we're doing a comp plan update anyway.
Well, I understand that. But we're asking to adopt these. And again, I realize it's super wonky because
it's beyond super wonky.
I understand, but I'm trying to understand. That's why I was asking planning staff, where's the link between those two things? If I can have some surety that it's there and you can show me, then I think my concern is satisfied. I'm just trying to figure it out. It's been a long time since I've read the Stormwater Master Plan, and I now remember why I didn't enjoy reading it. Not because it's not fascinating, John. It's just it's a lot of work.
Well, I mean,
but I didn't have the comp plan sections and the policies that go with that to make those links.
We got 4 minutes left, so I'm leaving at 10 o'clock. So
do we know
can
anything?
we close this discussion down?
Do we?
Don't think that,
I don't have the answer to the comp plan, but.
I know, that's why I was asking planning staff.
But we are moving forward with the comp plan amendment.
We are moving forward as the comp plan amendment, as we already identified as well. Another thing I would say is that we don't have a specific goal and policy in every chapter of the comp plan saying we will comply with state law. We just we have the burden of complying with state law always and forever. So there's not a specific goal and policy in every chapter of the comp plan.
So is there anything we've done tonight that would prevent a second reading and adoption of this item? No. Is there a motion?
I just would like staff to help me with the link of how the two are working together. That's what I'm asking for. And I don't think delaying this one more meeting is going to hurt, because I'd just like to see it so I'm assured that we are doing all that we can do.
Can we meet some middle ground here? I've heard all the arguments. I've heard about we can't meet a standard is not properly defined. We don't have the expertise if they were properly defined. Can we make just a general statement that would satisfy everybody, something to the effect that the City of Oregon City will make every effort to meet state standards as they become properly defined, or something like that? Because the argument is the target is not there. And obviously, I heard the argument, if you already have 100% clean water, how can you affect a 20 or 80 or another improvement upon that? I get that.
It's not clear and objective.
How do we do this in a policy that actually means something? If it's a matter of connecting the dots, the place to connect the dots is really the comprehensive plan. To include the water quality standards in the stormwater,
Let me ask a question. So are all the words in the comp plan a legal document, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if we said that at the beginning of chapter 6, was what we said? Yeah. If we said that at the beginning of chapter 6, haven't we done that already? Isn't it already connected?
It's very loose, not very specific.
Is there a motion?
So there's if I can make a comment. So these pieces are a piece of the comprehensive plan, and our job right now is not to open up the comprehensive plan and all the chapters and try to make edits to it. I mean, that's just not what we're being asked to do. These documents have not been updated in like 20 years. I asked the last time, and it was like 1988 since these things have been updated. These documents need to be updated. I don't think we're going to solve this piece tonight. What gave me some comfort at our last meeting when we talked about this was that we are planning to update our comp plan. We can rip chapter 6 apart from top to bottom at that time if we want to, and make all these connections and add language. I think we're all in agreement with Mr. Buss and NEDC that we can shore up some of these policies, and if the commission wants to make a definitive policy statement, I think at that time that seems like the better time to do that. But I feel like we're trying to open up the comp plan at this time when really what we're trying to do is just update these pieces that do need to be very clear and objective on the implementation of stormwater, which are, just supplemental pieces to our comp plan.
Not trying to open up the comp plan. I'm just asking for clarity on the comprehensive plan statements that are less specific and don't adopt standards, how we get from that part to the stormwater master plan. That is what I am asking. So I was asking for the specific comprehensive plan language that links these two things together. And Bill read a very general statement. So what I was looking for in the staff report, again, how this all links itself together. So I'm understanding we can open up the comp plan. I'm not asking to open that. I'm just asking for clarification from the staff report that the planning department put together to the stormwater master plan.
And I apologize, I'm having trouble understanding what the specific question is this. And so I'm gonna, let me know if what.
Is there a motion?
Sure, I can make a motion. Making a motion to approve 20-009 second reading of ordinance number 19-1014.
Is there a second?
I can try to help you. They're not gonna, nobody's gonna second, so I can try to help
We're not gonna solve it
you.
tonight, and I may need to go in to see that. So I would like to make a motion that we move this to the February 5th meeting, and I will make every effort to get into the planning department, and they can walk me through this, and then I can feel comfortable.
Second.
Moved and seconded, call a roll.
Commissioner Rachel L. Smith,
Sure, yay.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
Yay.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Mayor Dan Holliday.
Aye. Well, we are past our policy deadline as far as time is concerned. I don't see any reason that we shouldn't just move the 2010, 19-1015 to the same meeting.
Agreed.
So by acclamation, can we move that to the same meeting?
Yes.
Aye.
Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
You want a
Okay.
motion on the consent agenda?
An item's already been
No.
pulled from the, or.
I'm leaving. If you want to talk about that, you go ahead.
Is there consensus to move forward with the meeting? Yes, we have
Has
to
to
do
be
the
unanimous.
Yes.
No,
I'm
it doesn't.
No, it's consensus.
It does
It's
not have to be
consensus.
unanimous.
Yeah,
Is
I'm
there
fine.
consensus?
Yes, I'm fine.
Consensus, Rocky?
I'm fine.
Frank?
Sure, yes.
Okay. Rachel? Yep, okay.
No, you know what? This can wait until the next meeting.
No, it can wait.
Not it. Let's bring the meeting to a conclusion.
Okay.
Okay.
And with that, we're adjourned.
I'm tired of fighting.